Hello Year 10. So you've finished off the rest of Stave 1's reading and now you're ready to do your second analysis lesson. So the first thing you need to do is write today's title and date and underline them both. So your title is Analysing Stave 1 Part 2, so I've put Stave 1.2, underline with a ruler. Whatever your date is, the day you do this lesson, write it down, underline with a ruler. Then on to your starter. So the keyword you've been given in the PowerPoint is philanthropic. However you pronounce it, it means being generous and giving to the poor and needy, also loving mankind. So your starter is to use a sentence summarising the reading from last lesson using the word philanthropic or philanthropic, depending on how you say it. So can you please pause the video now? Get your title and date written down and underlined with a ruler, copy down the definition of your keyword for today, and then write me a sentence using it for your starter. Okay, pause now. Okay, Year 10. So you now need to turn to your context mind map that you've been doing. If you decided not to do this on a double page last lesson, then just make sure you've got a context box under today's title and date. Today we're going to focus on the Reverend Thomas Malthus, who was an economist. Now his idea that Dickens disagreed with went as follows: that there are people in poverty, and if you increase food production, or if there is more food available for people to eat, then that means the population's going to grow because there's more food to feed more people. However, if the population grows, that means there's less food to go around because it's divided between more people, which means that there's going to be people going hungry again. So he said that hunger and poverty were inevitable. So why are we trying to battle it? It's going to happen anyway. Dickens absolutely disagreed with this. England, Britain at the time was very wealthy. It was becoming wealthier. In the Victorian era, British society, there was the empire, so they were bringing in lots of money from overseas through trade, through rampaging through countries that didn't belong to them. And so actually, Britain's generating a lot of wealth and there was more than enough to go round. So it was the middle classes in particular who were horrified by the fact that the government, those in power, weren't tackling this issue of poverty when it was avoidable. Okay, so back to today's. You've been asked to analyse an extract from yesterday's reading. So the first instruction on the PowerPoint is to highlight the keywords in the question. So I suggest you copy down this question in your book so that you can highlight the keywords with me. Your question is, how are attitudes to poverty presented in this extract? So, the first word that you need to focus on is how. Every single time you see this word, it is important because how means using what techniques. So when you see how, you know that in your answer you need to talk about techniques. And then you need to have a look at what the focus for the question is. So is the focus Scrooge? Is it London? No, it's attitudes to poverty. Okay, so we are looking at what people think and feel about poverty, what their attitudes are. So those are the two focuses. So make sure you've got that question copied down in your book and you've highlighted those keywords. Right, so the next thing to do is to look at the extract itself and pull out your quotes, and you'll see here that I've made some space for my quotes. So if you do not have a copy of the book and if you do not have a copy of the PDF, then it's a really good idea for you to write down your planning in your book, which is why I'm modelling it here for you. But let's turn to the PDF. Okay, so the extract we have today goes over 2 pages on the PDF. So what I've done is I've drawn a blue box around the sections that are relevant. I've done a little arrow to tell myself that it goes on to the next page. So let's read through the extract quickly before we start picking out our quotes. And just to show myself, because these are my annotations that I have so far, just to show myself which the ones I'm going to use for the question are, I'm going to highlight those quotes in blue highlighter when it comes to it, just to remind myself that they're the ones that I want for this question. So let's read first. "At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge," said the gentleman, taking up a pen, "it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and the destitute, who suffer greatly at this present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessaries. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir." "Are there no prisons?" asked Scrooge. "Plenty of prisons," said the gentleman, laying down the pen again. "And the union workhouses?" demanded Scrooge. "Are they still in operation?" "They are still," returned the gentleman. "I wish I could say they were not." "The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigour, then?" said Scrooge. "Both very busy, sir." "Oh, I was afraid from what you said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course," said Scrooge. "I am very glad to hear it." "Under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body to the multitude," returned the gentleman, "a few of us are endeavouring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink, a means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What shall I put you down for?" "Nothing," Scrooge replied. "You wish to be anonymous?" "I wish to be left alone," said Scrooge. "Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I've mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there." "Many can't go there, and many would rather die." "If they would rather die," said Scrooge, "they had better do it, and decrease the surplus population. Besides, excuse me, I don't know that." Right, he's gone a little bit Mitchell Brothers, hasn't he? Okay, so what we need to do is we need to pick out our quotes that we would like to use. And our question is, how are attitudes to poverty presented in this extract? Now, having been through that extract, you will probably have picked out that we've got 2 very different attitudes to poverty, don't we? We've got Scrooge's attitude and the men from the charity's attitude. So it's entirely up to you. You can pick out quotes from Scrooge, you can pick out quotes from the gentleman, you can pick out a mixture of both. Can you please pause the video and highlight your quotes now? Year 10. So let's go through the extract and see which quotes you could have picked out. So I would first of all look at the gentleman. Thousands are in want, hundreds of thousands. Okay, so what I would say connects poor and destitute, suffer greatly, thousands are in want, hundreds of thousands, and common comforts, is that I think he uses emotive language. So I'm just going to pop here emotive lang. So that is all I'm going to say about those things. Okay. And then obviously we move on to Scrooge and his response. So his attitude to poverty is, are there no prisons? The union workhouses, the treadmill and the poor law are in full vigour. Now obviously we have this connection in that they are questions. We've already got that they're interrogative sentences, so we don't need to put anything other than that. It's their questions, and we can always have a look up to here. But Dickens has deliberately linked together or juxtaposed prisons and workhouses there, because as we know, workhouses were seen to be prisons for the poor. So that there is a juxtaposition to highlight the fact that they're in the same league. So to highlight their similarity. Okay. The treadmill, I don't know if you know about this, but the treadmill was literally a treadmill. Not the kind that you'd see in, Fitness First or Virgin Active Gym. It was a huge hamster wheel for people to walk on, and it was like a mill. So like you'd find in a windmill or a water mill. It was going round to, I think they were using it to mill things like mill corn. But yeah, they had men for hours on this hamster wheel, and they used to shuffle down it, so they'd get a break every few hours, but as they were kind of shuffling down it, they'd really hurt themselves. Lots of men maimed, injured, even killed on these treadmills, but that was seen as the punishment for criminals. Okay, so Dickens makes a deliberate link to the poor law here, doesn't he? Now, Scrooge here says, I was afraid from what you'd said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course. So I was afraid, so he's afraid that those awful laws have gone wrong somehow. Of course, people are afraid of those awful laws, so that is irony. And then moving on to the second half of the extract. We go back to the gentleman. So we've got the Christian cheer of mind, we've got that religious imagery there. Want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. I would also say that this here, the use of questions, contrasts with Scrooge's use of questions. And then I think, obviously, we've got this quote here. We've got that plosive alliteration. We've got this heartless tone. Okay, so now we've got the quotes that are interesting highlighted. Then I suggest you plan out which ones you're going to use in your answer. So back to our book. Lots of scribblings from my daughter in this book. So I think obviously we need to have I'd say 3 quotes from Scrooge. So I'm going to go with, if they would rather die, and I'm going to miss out the said Scrooge. I'm just going to do a ... to show that I've missed something. They'd better do it. And we've got plosive alliteration. So if you're planning out in your book, do make sure that you are writing what the technique is, because you've got to, as we know that how means what techniques, you've got to analyse techniques. Okay, so we've got that, and then I'd go, are there no prisons, and that juxtaposition with and the union workhouses. Okay, so we've got interrogative sentences. Okay, right, and then I think it's quite nice to have a contrast with the gentleman. So I'd say, if we go for sort of 3 quotes, so we've got that contrast with the emotive language. And then we're just going to pick out a few words of the gentleman's emotive language. So we've got suffer, we've got poor and destitute, And then we've got actually repeated, we've got many thousands are in want, and then we've got want is keenly felt. So we've got want, which is a form of repetition. Okay, so once you've got your quotes planned out, if you are planning them in your book, you need to make yourself an umbrella point. So this is a point sentence that summarizes what you think the overall impression is in the extract of the attitudes to poverty. So I'm going to ask you to just pause here and write me a point sentence. Okay, it doesn't matter if it's not perfect, I'll talk you through it afterwards, but give it a go now. Okay, so hopefully now you've come up with a point sentence. So I'm going to talk you through how I would do it. Grab yourself a green pen and you can edit yours if you feel that it's not quite up to scratch. So the really important thing with a point sentence is that you reference the writer, you say what the overall impression is, you're not too specific, and you try to link back what you have seen, what the writer does with the writer's intentions. So, because we're analysing the extract, I'm going to start with in the extract, and then I'm going to use the word Dickens to show that I'm focused on the writer. And then I'm going to try and summarise, right, what am I seeing in all of these quotes? Well, I'm seeing a contrast in the attitudes towards the poor. So Dickens shows contrasting attitudes towards poverty. Now, if you want a grade 5 or a grade 6, that's fine. Stop there. But we don't. We want to go higher. We want to get a grade 7 or above. So we need to be conceptual. And that means explaining why. What is Dickens's intention? So, in the extract, Dickens shows contrasting attitudes towards poverty in order to, and what he's doing is he's having these good and these bad attitudes to poverty next to one another in order to show how negative Scrooge's attitude is. Yeah? So in order to criticise those who neglect the poor. Okay, so we have added just an in order to, and then what Dickens is doing, really great verb to use here, criticise. So if you think that the writer is trying to say that something's bad, you would use the verb criticise. If they're trying to say that something's good, you use the verb celebrate. So because he's saying that Scrooge's attitude is bad, we're going to use that verb criticise. So in the extract, Dickens shows contrasting attitudes towards poverty, that's my summary of this, in order to criticise those who neglect the poor. I've got back to Dickens's intentions. Okay, so if you've got a green pen, have a look at what you wrote. Did you start with in the extract? Did you summarise what your quote showed? Did you at the end link back to Dickens's intentions and why he's doing that? If not, pause now and edit with your green pen. Okay, so once you've done your point sentence, it's really important that you try to link what Dickens is trying to do with the context. So what was going on in history that was influencing him? So it's really important that you do this at the start rather than tagging it onto the end, because it links better to your point sentence than it does to the end. So the context, so what are we going to talk about? Well, I think we're going to talk about the Poor Laws. So we're going to talk about the new Poor Law, 1834, okay, which meant that local councils relinquished. Now relinquish might be a new word for you. It means just let go of or got rid of. They said, here you go, not my problem anymore. Relinquished responsibility for the poor and sent them to workhouses which were seen to be prisons for the poor. You should know this from your context lesson that you did. Okay, so that's my context that I'm going to include. So I've got my point sentence, I've got my context, I've got my quotes. I am ready to write up my paragraph. So this is the order that I'm going to do it in, and I'm not going to write one to share with you because I would like you to do one on your own. So start with your point. Okay, it's got to be an umbrella point that summarises the whole extract. So you give your overall impression, and then you ask yourself why. What was Dickens's purpose? Okay, once you've done that, go into your context. Okay, so what influenced Dickens? Okay, so you're going to go point, then you're going to go context. You're going to write that up, and then you're going to go quote 1. So you're going to quote, you're going to do a technique, you're going to do zoom, and you're going to talk about the effect on the reader. Yeah? And then you're going to do quote 2, technique, zoom, effect, and then quote 3. Of course, for me, my quote 3 is a group of words, but still my technique is emotive language. I'm going to zoom in on one of the words from that group of words, and I'm going to talk about their overall effect. And then right at the end, summarise. Therefore, Dickens, and what is the effect, the overall effect of the extract on the reader. Okay, right. So point, quote, point, context, quote 1, technique, zoom, effect, quote 2, technique, zoom, effect, quote 3, technique, zoom, effect. Therefore, Dickens give an overall impression of the effect on the reader. Okay. Okay, so before I let you go off and write that paragraph, I just realised that I'd completely forgotten to include in my context some Malthus. Now, if you want to stick with the new poor laws and the workhouses here, then what you could do is you could embed some of that information about Malthus into the relevant quote, because as we know, if they would rather die, they had better do it is meant to be alluding to, that means referencing that Thomas Malthus quote. So you might want to refer to it as you're talking about the quote, not just at the start. You could, if you don't want to do it here, you could add it at the bottom. So therefore Dickens, he's trying to show the harshness or the brutality of people's attitudes towards the poor, including Thomas Malthus, who said, and then you can summarise. So, there are various different places where you can embed context. You can talk about it as you go. Now I'm saying do it mostly at the start, but you can talk about it with specific quotes if it links to a specific quote, or you could add it to your summary at the end if you're linking it to Dickens's overall intention and the effect on the reader. Okay, so your task for today, write up your paragraph, take a photo of it, send it to your teacher. You don't need to send us your annotations if you've annotated your book or your PDF. If you want to send us your planning, that's fine, but we want to see your paragraph, we want to see your starter where you use that word in a sentence, and any evidence of your context. Okay, well done Year 10, off you go, and I look forward to reading your paragraph.